You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Coming up, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Chief Executive of Conservative Home, Mark Wallace. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. It's no surprise that Matt Hancock is on almost all of the front pages. The Eye describes him as a hypocrite and says a poll suggests most people think he should resign. The Telegraph says public opinion will likely determine the Health Secretary's fate. The Guardian says he's under relentless pressure to stand down. But Boris Johnson is backing Mr Hancock, says The Express. Hopeless love rat backs hopeless love rat is the Star's headline. While the Mirror says cheat and liar, ... so PM backs him. How can he cling on, asked the Daily Mail. The Financial Times is the only paper without Matt Hancock on the front page. Its main story is Spain rejecting calls from Germany to force British tourists to quarantine in every EU country. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Mark Wallace to take us through those newspapers. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Mirror. The headline there, cheat and liar, ... So PM backs him. Susie.
Yeah. Boris Johnson has expressed his full confidence in a man he was describing as completely hopeless not 5 months ago. And is in a difficult situation because he has had extramarital affairs himself. He can't sack Matt Hancock for that, even though he may have broken the ministerial code. He can't sack him for breaking the ministerial code because Priti Patel wasn't. He can't sack him for breaching COVID rules because Dominic Cummings did that. And he doesn't appear to have noticed that he's actually broken the law as well by not having reasonably necessary work meetings with this lady. So Boris Johnson's on a bit of a sticky wicket. Also, if he does get rid of Matt Hancock, he's then got to have a reshuffle and he's got to move people around, which he doesn't want to do. He has to give in to media pressure, which he also doesn't want to do. But there's something here which lots of people are forgetting. And all these men in the newspapers talking about whether Matt Hancock's going to go and whether Boris Johnson backs him or not was almost irrelevant, because I think the real issue here is how much of this Mrs Hancock can put up with. Because you don't break a story on a Friday unless you've got a Saturday and a Sunday in the bag ready to go. And there aren't many wives, no matter what the state of your marriage might be, that are going to be prepared to put up with 3 days of revelations. There's a video out tonight on top of the still we had to endure yesterday. Goodness knows what's going to be in the Sun on Sunday, but I'm sure there'll be something. And Matt Hancock's going to be under relentless pressure. Never mind at work, but from home, I would have thought, because as long as he hangs on to his job, journalists will keep digging. They'll keep digging into links between his girlfriend and NHS contracts. They're going to keep digging into who knew what when and when the affair started and began, and what the status of everybody's relationships is. And it's a question that no one's going to be able to avoid. You can't dodge it. You can't outlive it. It's going to keep coming back for a long time. And if I was Mrs. Hancock, I would be telling my husband that he had to step down pretty rapid, to be honest.
Mark, what's your view? Is this a private matter, as some ministers would have us believe today? I heard from Grant Shapps speaking earlier on Sky News saying that it was a private matter, or is this something that he really should be held accountable for on very many levels, as Susie described?
Well, look at the newspapers. It couldn't really be any less private, could it? I mean, the fact is that there's, I think there is good reason to say that politicians are human beings, they have private lives, but this is not simply now a private matter. The fact is that there are three particular aspects to it, as I see it. The first is the question of personal behaviour in your personal relationships with other people. That's something that some people will judge a politician on. It's something that other people will put aside. But more, Mrs. Hancock, as Susie says, is the first and foremost victim in all that. But the two arguably bigger issues, and certainly the issues of public interest, are firstly that this is the Secretary of State who has been in charge of setting these extensive, massive rules, really difficult and hurtful and painful rules for a lot of people over the last 18 months, whether people have been specifically forbidden from seeing their partners. The Secretary of State's been on TV talking about whether sexual relations are allowed with someone you don't live with, but also whether people are allowed to say goodbye a loved one's deathbed, or to visit someone who is vulnerable and alone in a nursing home or living by themselves. That resonates very deeply with people if they see that there's a different kind of double standard. And the other aspect is this question of the fact that there's a question of the other party here being a non-executive director of the department, and that brings in questions of public scrutiny of how a department's run, and of course of taxpayers' money. So that's a long way of saying what I said at the outset. No, this is not just a private matter. Whether people protest it is or not, it plainly isn't.
And Susie, the next question is, can he survive? The Mail saying, how can he cling on?
Yeah, there are sort of some truisms in journalism and politics about how long a scandal, how many days of front pages can a political career maintain, survive. And I think most people would agree that this particular government doesn't appear to be following the normal rules on that sort of thing. Ministers are surviving things that they would have gone for under previous administrations. Theresa May would have dumped quite a few of cabinet ministers by this point if she'd had to endure it. But like I said, Mrs. Hancock's probably going to be the person that actually determines what happens next. Whether she stands by her husband, whether she doesn't, whether she decides they want to try again and fix their family. But that's going to determine whether or not Mr. Hancock wants to resign, whether or not he needs to resign. And what Boris Johnson wants isn't going to be at the top of Mrs. Hancock's priorities, I wouldn't have thought for a moment. And as Mark pointed out there are 400,000 people in care homes who have not been able to see their loved ones for a year and a half on this man's instructions, and partly because of this man's failures at the start of the pandemic. There's 150,000 people who have died as a result of COVID, and many of them haven't seen their loved ones. Even people who haven't died as a result of COVID haven't had visits to hospital and so on. So there are lots of very angry people in Britain tonight. There's those of us just talking and loving the scandal, but there's a lot of really furious people out there, quite rightly, very, very angry that the man who kept them apart from their loved ones at a terrible time has been playing away from home.
And Mark, we've heard from the Health Secretary saying that he actually does want to continue in the job. It doesn't seem as though he's planning to resign anytime soon. We know that he's got the full confidence of Boris Johnson, but do you think that the Prime Minister's position will change, that he will have to bow to pressure? As you say, these are the headlines on Friday night, and they're likely to be the headlines throughout the weekend.
Well, Susie talked about one possible scenario, which is the pressure that might be applied hypothetically by Mrs. Hancock in this particular situation. But there are a number of other different pressures that I suspect are going to come to bear. The first is, of course, that his lover in this story could herself choose to resign, which one I think the question it starts to be raised, well, if one party's gone, why has the other not? There's the question that we see, a lot of which is aired in the Daily Telegraph's front page tonight, about exactly where the Parliamentary Conservative Party comes down on this. The week of a politician has a very particular shape. The days you spend in Westminster are days you spend talking to other politicians and to the media and to your whips in the party. The days you spend at the weekend are time you spend talking to your own family, your local party members and your constituents. And I suspect an awful lot of people will be hearing from their constituents about this in the next couple of days, in addition to those who already have. But it's also a question of, where I disagree with Susie, she said earlier, well, he couldn't be sacked because Dominic Cummings wasn't sacked. Well, it is possible to learn from past experience. If you look at, I got in a lot of trouble with various people online last year when I wrote at this stage, really, of the Dominic Cummings row, that actually the best thing for all involved, including him, would have been to resign at that stage. Judging from his own evidence a few weeks ago before Parliament, he, in retrospect, seems to think that he ought to have would have been better going some time around then. And I think it is possible to learn the lessons of things that have gone wrong. The Daily Telegraph says, Matt Hancock's job could be at risk if this becomes a Barnard Castle. Well, this already is a Barnard Castle. If anybody watching this opens their family or neighbourhood WhatsApp group and looks at some of the memes that are doing the rounds, you see it's already got cut through. It couldn't be, there's no kind of stay of process while everyone pauses before something does electoral damage. I'm sad to say, as someone who likes Matt Hancock, I'm sad to say that I think this is already proving politically damaging.
And Susie, do you think there will be internal pressure from the Conservative Party on Boris Johnson to actually change his mind and come forth and get rid of Matt Hancock?
There's bound to be, because there are a lot of Tory grandees who are slightly more aware than the Prime Minister, perhaps, of the damage that some of the recent scammers have been doing to the blue base, things that we saw in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election when the Lib Dems managed to take a Tory seat off them. But part of the reason, as Dominic Cummings has said, and it appears to be true, that Boris Johnson hasn't already fired Matt Hancock for a multitude of sins up to this point, is because he's a very good shield, and if Matt Hancock were to go, willingly or unwillingly, then any sort of problems with the pandemic that continue in government that can be traced back to this stage or last year, the only person that can get the blame for it then at some point in the future would be the Prime Minister. He would be, if Matt Hancock's not there, then whoever the new Health Secretary is will be comparatively clean skin and be able to say, well, that was nothing to do with me, Governor. And it will be Boris Johnson, therefore, who gets the blame for things that come out at some point in the future. And it's very well having a nice, handy fall guy there ready for you to defenestrate at the right opportunity. But you can't keep him forever if he makes these kind of mistakes.
Mark, it does seem really difficult to see how he can survive. Just looking at the I front page with a number of people that are upset with Matt Hancock. We've got bereaved family groups saying the PM's failure to sack Hancock is a slap in the face. Doctors hit out at breathtaking hypocrisy, and they're pointing to a poll in which the majority believe that he should resign.
Yes, the polling is certainly not looking good, as I made kind of a bleak reference to earlier, and that includes notably large proportions of Conservative voters, if you wanted to look at this just in a partisan sense. I mean, it obviously, by definition, it is possible that they'll stick it out and simply refuse to change tack. Look what happened last year, as I said earlier, with the Dominic Cummings kind of Barnard Castle incident. The question is, firstly, whether it's wise to do that. Secondly, whether it's right. And third, if you were to decide it was wise and it was right, something I would disagree with, obviously, the question is what would happen next? And, learning from experience would involve recognising that what happens next is you suffer the political damage and eventually you may well lose the person involved anyway, at which point you've paid multiples of the price and you haven't really gotten the upside out of it. Yes. It is true to say that your prime ministers don't like being bounced into things and forced into things. By definition, they're prime ministers. They don't really like having their own cabinet.
We shall see. We shall see if he'll have his hand forced. For the minute, Mark and Susie, thank you very much. We are going to take a break. Coming up, Spain breaks ranks with the EU. Will it help British tourists jet off on a foreign holiday?
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you.
Police have just made their first move and they've gone in firing tear gas.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. So there are hundreds of these turbines, with thousands more across Gansu. That's what's left of the North Tunnel, where the North Koreans exploded 5 nuclear warheads. And this is a show of strength at a time when China is more fragile than it has been at any time in recent years. Shrapnel from that explosion, so you can see it littered along all the way. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. The train station and the airport, they're both closed. We're not sure about the roads. We've seen reports that they are being blocked by police, so we're going to try and find a way out of Wuhan. After 5 days stranded here, this is Deliverance. We help you understand the world with us. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Beijing.
Our job is to tell the truth.
This is a forgotten front line. They are dying here.
Here it comes. Cut.
Boy, have we got some interesting ways of showing you what's going on.
Their message to us, get ready.
Nothing like apocalypse.
Instructing you to stay at home.
I can't believe we did that.
It's pretty special, isn't it?
We are at a breaking point and we need to work now and fast.
Even though young people are vulnerable to the impact of climate change, young people can also become the change agents that we need to address the climate impact. In my campaign or in my advocacy work, I work largely with young people so that their voices can be heard, so they can also influence decision making from the local level to the national level. And thankfully, we are making progress in that regard.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, still with me. Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Chief Executive of Conservative Home, Mark Wallace. Susie, I'm going to come to you first, and let's take a look at the FT, momentarily away from Matt Hancock, and this story about Spain breaking ranks with Germany. Angela Merkel wants this policy of EU-wide quarantining for British tourists, but Spain's saying no.
At the moment, yes. So Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, has said that, she's concerned about the Delta variant coming into Europe by lots of different nations having different rules. Spain has decided, however, that it does want to make its own rules on who can come in and who can't. And they're desperate to restart some of their tourism industry, which sort of slumped by 80% last year. However, we do know that Spain's sort of hotspots for new infections are in the south of the country, where lots of British tourists tend to go, far more than the interior. And they have said that they may reconsider at some point in the future. There is some pressure to change the quarantine rules. So while it might be nice to go to Mallorca and Ibiza right at the moment, go quickly, because they might change it.
Yes, go quickly, come back quickly. You never know when it might change. Mark, we'll just finish off on this cartoon, this Matt cartoon, Matt Hancock. That's not how you take a COVID swab. Your thoughts?
Yes, as ever, Matt kind of puts his finger straight on the marmalade dropper of a story that we saw this morning, and I'm afraid again tomorrow, now that we all get the joys of the actual video clip too.